Hi, I am Matteo Frigoli. I graduated from the University of Parma, where I specialized in the international law of armed conflict and the military uses of outer space. I authored the British Pugwash research paper on the implications of the advent of hypersonic weapon systems for strategic stability, and this presentation is largely based on the findings of that research paper. Hypersonic missiles are a new type of missile which possesses speed and maneuvering capabilities capable to make them a game changer in a nuclear and conventional interstate competition scenario. They are much faster than cruise missile and much more maneuverable than existing ballistic missile reentry vehicles. So I would like to make clear why hypersonic missiles are different from existing cruise and ballistic missiles. I think it's good to start by pointing out which are the key elements of hypersonic missiles: speed, maneuverability, and unusual altitudes. In fact, hypersonic missiles can reach and maintain hypersonic speeds, which are speeds exceeding Mach 5. Hypersonic missiles follow a non-ballistic endoatmospheric trajectory, flying between 80 miles and 60 miles in altitude. Their maneuverability will allow them to change course up to the last minutes of flight, and the objective is to make this weapon capable to achieve a high degree targeting precision. To avoid any misunderstanding, it is important to state that existing ballistic missiles can reach hypersonic speeds. An ICBM is capable to reach a speed of about 20 to 25 Mach. This speed is hardly achievable by hypersonic missiles since they will fly for most of their flight inside the atmosphere. So, speed is not a unique feature of hypersonic missiles, but as we will see, speed is not everything. Now it is important to try to set out a specific difference between ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles. As can be seen from the images, the most evident difference between ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles are the trajectories and the altitudes followed. Ballistic missiles fly at much higher altitudes than hypersonic missiles and follow predictable arch-shaped trajectories. A typical ballistic missile will travel in outer space for the most part of its flight. On the other hand, the second image showed that hypersonic missiles follow a non-ballistic trajectory, flying for the most part of their flight inside the atmosphere. They would operate at altitudes significantly below those of ballistic missiles, and unlike ballistic missiles, they are capable to maneuver for the most part of their flight. This has strong implications for detection. Mostly, it is possible to predict the destination of any given ballistic missile payload by using space-based and ground-based early warning systems. Space-based early warning systems can track a ballistic missile in the boost phase of its flight by detecting the intense heat generated by the first stage engine. The boost phase is relatively short in duration. For medium and short-range missiles, the boost phase lasts at most only a couple of minutes, while for a missile of intercontinental range it may be as long as 3 to 5 minutes. Because of the relatively predictable trajectory of ballistic missiles, the boost phase detection by space-based assets allows an opponent to make a first assessment of the target of the missile and to calculate the warning time at its disposal. For example, it is estimated that space assets would guarantee a warning time of approximately 30 minutes in the case of an ICBM traveling from the Russian base of Tombarovsky to US Warren Air Force Base. By contrast, the view of ground-based early warning radars will be limited by the curvature of the Earth, and the warning time they can provide will be much shorter than that provided by space-based assets. It is reported that a powerful radar like the US PAVE-POSE radars or the Russian Voronezh radars can track a ballistic missile with a range of about 2,000 miles from 100 to 550 miles away, resulting in about 4 minutes of tactical warning. In the case of hypersonic missile, early warning systems would not guarantee the same timelines of warning. Hypersonic missiles like ICBMs will be detectable in their initial boost phase by satellite early warning systems. Thereafter, by flying at lower altitudes than ballistic missiles, they will cease to be detectable. After the unobservable phase, hypersonic missile flying at heights between 18 and 25 miles will become detectable when traveling within about 250 to 370 miles of a ground-based radar. Even if detected by a ground-based radar, there will be a high degree of uncertainty about their destinations. This slide's purpose is to summarize the main differences between ballistic missiles and hypersonic missiles. As regards the maneuverability, ballistic missiles can offer a chance to maneuver only during the terminal phase of their flight, and only if they are equipped with a maneuvering reentry vehicle, or MORV warhead. The terminal phase is that portion of flight when the warhead re-enters the atmosphere from outer space, which lasts approximately 30 seconds before impact. MARV warhead can offer a chance to maneuver only during the terminal phase of their flight, while, as it has been said, hypersonic missiles can maneuver for the most part of their trajectory. Moreover, since MARVs follow a ballistic trajectory, they could be easily detected by space-based and ground-based radars. In other words, states that do not possess a reliable satellite early warning system can only expect to become aware of a hypersonic missile strike during the latter part of the missile trajectory. And the maneuvering capability of hypersonic missiles will mean that even those states who can detect the hypersonic missiles will be uncertain of their impact and of their destination. There are two types of hypersonic missile that have already been well tested: the Hypersonic Boost Glide Vehicle (HGV) and the Hypersonic Cruise Missile (HCM). An HGV is an unpowered vehicle capable of gliding on the upper atmosphere at hypersonic speeds. In order to reach hypersonic speeds, HGVs need to be propelled by a rocket, probably an existing type of ICBM. Release from the booster rocket can take place, depending on the target location, between 25 miles and 60 miles above the Earth's surface. At this point, the HGV descends into the atmosphere where a pull-up maneuver is executed to enable it to gain equilibrium and glide to its target along a relatively flat trajectory. On the other hand, an HCM is a cruise missile capable of operating at hypersonic speeds. It is equipped with a scramjet engine or supersonic ramjet, which generates thrust from a supersonic airflow. Before the scramjet enters an operation, an HCM needs to achieve a supersonic speed. This is usually done by the use of additional boosters and by launching the HCM from an aircraft. Existing cruise missiles are hardly detectable, flying at very low altitude, and follow unpredictable trajectories. HCMs will offer, in addition, flight speed capable of posing a complex defensive challenge. Hypersonic cruise missiles will fly at lower altitude than hypersonic boost glide vehicles, that is, between 12 miles and 30 miles above the Earth's surface, but still higher than most current surface-to-air missile systems are capable of reaching. Defensive missile systems could be designed to reach the hypersonic cruise missiles' altitudes, but the hypersonic cruise missile speed would still present a challenge for such interceptors. What can be firstly said about hypersonic missiles is that they represent a weapon system especially suitable for great power competition. Indeed, states that do not possess an advanced missile defense system or do not possess advanced early warning radars will not see their vulnerability increased by the deployment of hypersonic missiles. Why? Because these states are already almost defenseless against existing types of missile. But states which possess advanced missile defense systems, like the three great powers, the US, China, and Russia, will see their vulnerability increased by the deployment of hypersonic missiles. It is well known that missile defenses cannot provide a real protection against a well-coordinated missile attack. But it is also true that states which possess missile defenses or advanced missile defense systems rely on the fact that these systems can at least degrade an incoming attack and raise the costs for an aggressor to strike its intended targets. The map shows some of the Chinese missile command and control posts. It is reasonable to think that these assets are well defended against existing types of missile. But the effectiveness of these the Chinese defenses, is unknown against an incoming hypersonic strike. Today, the United States, China, and Russia are by far the nations with the most developed hypersonic technologies. They are engaged in what can be regarded as a hypersonic arms race. These nations have conducted several hypersonic missile tests in the last decade and are close to deploying a limited number of hypersonic missiles. The recent US attempts to militarize hypersonic technologies are part of the Conventional Prompt Global Strike program, initiated by the Bush administration in 2003. The program has the aim to develop fast, long-range, non-nuclear weapons capable of striking targets anywhere in the world within 1 hour of time. Hypersonic missiles are the most likely candidate for that mission. The conventional prompt global strike objectives are to deny rogue states the ability to employ nuclear arsenals, to destroy or disable anti-satellite capabilities, to counter anti-access or area denial capabilities, to kill high-value targets, and other important objectives seem to be the engagement of deep inland targets, to cripple an adversary's essential warfighting capabilities, and to address the growing threats to forward-deployed forces and bases, ensuring U.S. power projection capabilities. Michael Griffin, Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, has stated that developing hypersonic weapons is the highest technical priority for the U.S. military. These are only the few but most important hypersonic weapon systems developed by the US, China, and Russia. Though it should not be overlooked that, at least at this stage, hypersonic missiles are conceived as providing a niche capability. It is noteworthy to point out that Russia has already deployed the Avangard hypersonic boost glide vehicle, but it is not clear if the Avangard is a real hypersonic weapon or an existing type of re-entry vehicle may be capable to glide in the latter part of its flight. As has been described, hypersonic missiles possess greater maneuverability than ICBM re-entry vehicles and greater speed than existing cruise missiles. These characteristics have the potential to affect strategic stability relationships, especially between US, China, and Russia. Moreover, there are 3 additional destabilizing factors to be considered: the warhead ambiguity, the target ambiguity, and the destination ambiguity. One of the relevant questions for understanding the impact of hypersonic missiles on strategic stability is to ask whether hypersonic vehicles, once detected, would leave an opponent enough time to decide on and implement an adequate response. Decision makers, once hypersonic missile strikes have been detected, would operate in a degraded environment of compressed timelines and destination target uncertainty. In many cases, the chain of command following the detection of hypersonic missiles would be under even greater pressure than in the case of long-range ballistic missiles. To mitigate this problem, the United States is currently working on the development of a new satellite sensor layer, which presumably would be positioned in low Earth orbit. The sensor layer would provide birth-to-death tracking of both ballistic missiles and hypersonic vehicles. Meanwhile, Russia and China are working on a new generation of over-the-horizon radars. These may prove able to detect hypersonic missiles from thousands of miles away. Nonetheless, it seems likely that extended tracking of hypersonic missiles will prove very difficult and that this will affect the time strategic factor. This and the impossibility of predicting their targets with any certainty will result in a degraded environment for the elaboration and communication of a response. Let us consider the case of 2 states possessing nuclear-armed hypersonic missiles. An imbalance does not exist if both continue to respect agreed warhead deployment limits. but that balance will be unstable because the characteristics of hypersonic delivery systems will be perceived as enhancing first strike capabilities. Moreover, the accuracy of these weapons could lead one state to believe that a surgical low-yield nuclear strike could be acceptable to an adversary, while the other state would see any use of this weapon as an existential threat. Equally, an irresponsible leadership could decide to use nuclear-armed hypersonic systems and accept a low-yield nuclear strike in return. And in the case of both sides being willing to accept hypersonic low-yield nuclear strikes, the one who then found himself at a disadvantage could decide to escalate. We may conclude that symmetry in hypersonic nuclear arsenals will not provide a rationale for the stability between possessor states. Instead, it will create a status quo in which the fear of being preempted becomes the dominant factor. By contrast, the threat to nuclear-based deterrence would be mitigated if only conventionally armed hypersonic missiles were present in the arsenals of two opposing states. The use of conventional hypersonic systems to degrade an opponent's nuclear forces would require the employment of hundreds of hypersonic missiles. Preparations for their use would be hard to conceal, giving the opponent time to put nuclear forces on high alert. Also, it is doubtful whether conventionally armed hypersonic missiles could effectively destroy silo-based nuclear missiles. In other words, it is not by looking at their first strike potential that the core of the destabilizing potential of conventionally armed hypersonic missiles become apparent. Instead, one needs to look at their potential to threaten early warning radars, dual-use command and control nodes, air and missile defense assets, and time-critical or mobile targets to put an adversary in a highly disadvantageous position at the outbreak of a conflict. The risk is that conventionally armed hypersonic weapons could, intentionally or by mistake, degrade the systems required for operating certain nuclear assets or destroy other vital assets, and that this could trigger an intentional or accidental nuclear response. The purpose of this slide is to show how an irresponsible leadership could feel confident about the feasibility of a hypersonic low-yield nuclear strike. This scenario is particularly risky if one considers that our current nuclear era is a competition in risk-taking, is characterized by a competition in risk-taking. And the characteristics of hypersonic missiles, capable to compress timelines, capable to penetrate existing defenses, and to hit with accuracy, could only exacerbate this scenario. Because an all-out war among nuclear states could lead to the destruction of each side, nuclear-armed states would tend to engage in forms of violence different from an all-out war. But this is a highly risky activity. Indeed, their willingness of engaging in forms of violence different from an all-out war will always be highly influenced by their willingness to run risks. Our nuclear era is influenced by the art of nuclear brinkmanship. That is the ability to go up to the threshold of war in order to get a political advantage. Robert Jervis noted, "War must be avoided, but the other side's need to avoid war can be used for leverage." Russia and China see the US plans to deploy highly precise conventional hypersonic missiles as a US attempt to cripple their nuclear retaliatory capabilities. A perception that hypersonic weapons could prove decisive in a military conflict is shaping the strategic posture of both Russia and China. The 2014 Russian military doctrine regards as a military threat as well as a risk for their deterrent capability the deployment of a strategic non-nuclear system of high-precision weapons. In other words, the doctrine considers conventional hypersonic weapons to be equivalent to nuclear weapons in terms of their implication for deterrence. The Chinese government shares the Russian view that hypersonic systems will pose a threat to opponents' nuclear forces. In the 2013 Science of Military Strategy, the Chinese Academy of Military Science argues that the US conventional prompt global strike weapons could force China into a disadvantaged passive position by weakening Chinese nuclear counterstrike capability. Given the relatively small size of Chinese nuclear arsenal, a large US hypersonic arsenal could undermine the Chinese nuclear deterrent capability. It is also reported that China is worried about the potential combination of high-precision warhead delivery methods with low-yield nuclear warheads. Such weapon would be tactically usable. The US decision to place missile defense systems and radar systems in the Asia-Pacific region is also a driver for Chinese concern about hypersonic weapons. These factors are contributing to Chinese decision to raise the alert of nuclear forces and build a launch warning capability. We could consider an imaginary scenario. A Chinese attack on Taiwan would lead the US to launch a small fleet of conventional hypersonic missiles from the Philippine Sea towards the Fujian province, facing the Taiwan Strait. The Mach 8 hypersonic missiles would fly the 800 miles to their targets in about 10 minutes. Their mission would be the destruction of coastal defenses as well as communication nodes and power plants, in order to disable Chinese command and control capabilities. Several Chinese early warning radars pointed at Taiwan would detect incoming hypersonic missiles flying as low as 12 to 15 miles in altitude from about 500 miles away. This would provide about 16 minutes of warning time. Given that China has raised considerably the alert level of its nuclear forces and is building strategic early warning systems enabling the adoption of a launch of warning posture, how would the Chinese government cope with such a short decision time? Would they possess the means to ask the US counterparts to clarify the nature of the warheads? Could the use of hypersonic weapons at an early stage of a conventional conflict result in such a damage to the Chinese vital assets that the Chinese government could decide to escalate to an all-out war? Left unaddressed by arms control measure, the advent of hypersonic missiles is likely to be destabilizing. The US, China, and Russia, as a first step, could look for ways of reducing hypersonic missiles ambiguity. One short-term measure that might mitigate the warhead ambiguity risk would be to locate conventional hypersonic missiles and command and control infrastructures far away from the sites of nuclear hypersonic missiles and nuclear ballistic missiles. Other short-term measures could be of a unilateral nature. The United States, Russia, and China could enhance the capacity and survivability of early warning assets and land-based nuclear and command and control posts. In the longer term, a treaty might better address the risks presented by hypersonic missiles. A hypersonic treaty could set numerical limits on the deployment of conventional and nuclear hypersonic missiles in order to provide an assurance in relation to the survivability of nuclear and command and control assets, and also to contribute to a better assessment of the threat environment by lowering concerns about decisive first strikes. The nature of hypersonic payloads could be the object of on-site inspections. The treaty could also provide for fixed places of deployment of hypersonic missiles following the model of the ABM Treaty, which limited the size of ABM systems. That said, it should be recognized that such a treaty could do no more than reduce risks. In the event of the outbreak of a conflict involving hypersonic possessor states, on-site inspections would surely be suspended and conventional warheads could be replaced with nuclear warheads. Thank you for your attention. I will be really happy to answer all your questions and to hear all your comments about this presentation. Goodbye.